Sex Trafficking, Technology to End It. My name is Steph Perkins, and I prepared this presentation for Cyber 200 Beyond the Code, which is a class in Mike's program at the University of California, Berkeley. This presentation will bring light to modern-day sex slavery and explain how technological advancements can aid in solving some of the primary issues. I'll begin with the overview and touch on the importance of this issue, and then review the scope of the research. Then discuss the current technology in place, gaps where I've identified, thus leaving where technological solutions could enhance the effort to end sex trafficking. So starting off, we have a problem. So sex trafficking occurs when someone uses force, fraud, or coercion to cause a commercial sex act with an adult or a minor. So this corruption is the fastest growing international crime because it's essentially invisible. It's hard to track, it's low risk for the buyer and the seller, and there's an instant reward for both the buyer and the seller. One gets cash and the other sex. So this is a little process of how the buyer fuels the market with their money. The trafficker earns the money by exploiting the victim, and then the victim's at a loss of both sex and money. So then we move on to how technology is used, and perpetrators primarily communicate through online ads and markets, so technological solutions could aid in ending this exploitation. So here's an example of an ad. They just post the child's pick, a price, and a description. So it's similar to how you would search for a car, which is sad. And then there's motivation for this project that just was created by the update in legislation to Section 230. So that's the Communications Decency Act, and that shields tech companies from liability on content that are posted by the users of their website. So an exception was created in April of 2018 to help end sex trafficking and fight for sex trafficking, called the FOSTA-SETA Act. So this exception will bring liability to website publishers and internet companies that knowingly facilitate sex trafficking on their platform. This bill amends a part of the federal law, and it begins with clarifying that it was never intended to provide legal protection to websites that are unlawfully promoting and facilitating prostitution, especially of minors. So, therefore, now that Section 230 went into place, sex trafficking will continue, but now move to the underground web, where the ads will be posted, and they'll be using Tor to maintain anonymity, so it will be much harder to catch the buyers and the sellers, and also will take more time to find victims. So the scope of this research, I researched 3 primary questions. So what technology exists today that is aiding and ending sex trafficking? What gaps exist where technological growth is needed? And then how can technological advancements aid in solving this issue? While this topic can expand outside the core elements of this class, sex trafficking is very relevant to the course material. Anonymity. Buyers and sellers of sex try to remain anonymous in their sales and purchases. And then when developing an idea on how we could advance in technology, attribution and traceability are key when narrowing down research, trying to find the device where the ads are sold and purchased, as well as who is behind it. And because a lot of devices have biometric features now, attribution is another element that we could use to find the devices beyond the IP address and the MAC address. So part of the tech advancement is also performing forensics on the dark web, analyzing the cryptography patterns, geographical movement, and that will help us trace it to a perpetrator. And then considering what privacy policies exist where we can't scrape data from, and then also how much is too much where it gets into illegal hacking. So now I'll begin with analyzing the current technology in place. So there are 4 primary companies that I selected to highlight. While there are others, they perform similar features, and these companies had a bigger approach that included some of the smaller details of the other companies. So Thorn, they're using deterrence on popular sites where the ads are being sold, and if they can trace the IP address, they're sending a message to the buyer saying, if we can find you, so can the police. So that's more of a scare tactic, but it's helping the buyer feel less anonymous. And then they came up with a shared hash program so that when a company finds child abuse images on their own networks, they can upload that to a central repository and create a digital footprint so that investigative services can use that image to bump that up against the missing children photos for a more rapid identification, and then also so that tech companies can safely remove the content from their network. Then there's Callisto. This was primarily invented to help students at campuses survive, like the ones that have been sexually assaulted, to create a secure timestamp of their assault, and then only to report it to the college when they're ready to take action. So they expanded this year to detect serial perpetrators of multiple assaults, and they do this by creating a reporting platform that will allow the victim to submit the identity of their perpetrator into a matching escrow, and the information can only be decrypted by Callisto. So if another victim names the same perpetrator, then there would output a match, and they would decrypt the identity of the serial perpetrator and match victims. And they will reach out to the victims to discuss if they want to have some options for pursuing justice for what was done to them. It was basically Shamir secret sharing and to find repeat perpetrators across differing sectors for if there was one or more victims. So then there's Quantiverse. This software was created to investigate money laundering in banks. They track how the money is moved, how quickly, and where it's being moved to, and then they report on the behavior, creating links, the characteristics, and how the accounts are associated. So they sell this tool to banks, and they are monitoring also when a customer, the account has the money deposited in a late night transaction, and then all of the money is then transferred over to another account on a continual basis. So a lot of perpetrators are using victims' accounts, and once the victim collects the money, they deposit it into their own bank account after the night is done, and then transfer that over to the perpetrator so that it's less money for the perpetrator to deposit. Then there's Face First, and that uses facial recognition for video to deter and detect real-time threats. They have video clips, and then they match them against images in a database. So they are the leading facial recognition for retail and public safety. So they have this mask ID that they created, which is a new privacy feature, and that helps individuals maintain their anonymity within facial recognition systems. The mask ID will instantly blur the facial images without compromising the match accuracy. So they're primarily in the retail and public safety space, so I just wanted to note that. Then there are some gaps after performing what tech exists. So when perpetrators move from banks where the money laundering is being heavily monitored and moving over to cryptocurrencies, and then video image recognition, not just for the retail shoplifter area, but also how we can incorporate that into sex trafficking, and then creating network links for the buyers and sellers. So for the first one, a lot of the perpetrators were using banks as their primary means of moving the money around, and now they'll be moving to Bitcoin. And there are technologies being developed today that will help you to money launder easily on Bitcoin by concealing your IP address, and it will make the transaction the destination of the transaction untraceable. So that will be an issue now that they're moving from the banks to the Bitcoin. And then there is the video image recognition software. So they, as I mentioned, Face First was primarily in the public safety area. So if we could use that for the purpose of finding victims when there's child pornography videos uploaded onto these ads, we can use the images in those videos and link them to images of missing children in a database. And then for underground web ads, there's no tool that's collectively capturing all this data. Everything is very siloed in the way that it's gathered and researched. So if we could create something that could link the buyers and the sellers as they are moving geographically all the time, that would be another great way to start by ending this. So I'll propose the technological solutions based on some of those gaps. So my development idea is to scrape the underground web and then create links between the buyers and the sellers of those ads, and then using video image recognition from the ads that were collected. So first start off by scraping the dark web. So this would be by running a Linux command line tool through Tor to allow me to find various mentions of sex ads and trafficking. So this section will load the request module, which we'll use to actually handle the HTTP and HTTPS connections, and then the HTML modules from LXML we'll use to parse the HTML, and then URL parse so that we can parse URLs, collections so we can easily work with queues, and then sys so we can work with the ARGV. So then this, after the scrape is complete, we can create links to buyers and sellers by what phone numbers did they publish, the image and the video content, if it's similar between different areas on the underground web. And then part of that will also be performing forensics for attribution and traceability. So they are there's tools that you can find the fingerprinting and that can be used to determine where the hidden services of a user is accessed with 88% accuracy. And that's solely on the pattern of the packets that were sent without breaking the encryption. So that will help find some of the buyers and the sellers, even if they are trying to conceal their anonymity. And for attribution, it would be great if that we could collect biometric data, especially because a lot of these devices, the iPads and the phones they're using, have different fingerprint scanners installed on it already. So we could track that down to the actual perpetrator. But there are CFAA regulations on illegal hacking and how much information we can collect, because that will go into more of illegal material. So then we would feed the data from the scrape into a big data analytics system and create the networks and links to the buyers and sellers and victims. And things that we would capture are the geographic location, the selling price, phone numbers, and because the victims are scattered all throughout the country, because how they typically work is they only stay 2 or 3 nights in one location and then post their ads and then pick up and completely move to another area. Then we can apply cryptography, such as secure multi-party computation with Shamir secret sharing, similar to how Callisto did it, to find repeat offenders. But rather than it being a source for victims to find perpetrator, it would be able to input info from the search by keeping your own company's data secret. So then if someone else picks up the same pattern that you have, then it will show a match with how many other people so that they can investigate where to go from there. So then lastly would be to help to the victims using video and image recognition. So we could pull down the videos from these ads and match them up against missing children photos. And big tech companies are already on board with ending sex trafficking from a charity standpoint, as long as it doesn't interfere with their privacy rights and new legislation limiting their freedom on the underground web. But if we could also get, so sometimes a lot of these big tech companies will already have a bunch of unwanted images. That's where Thorn came into place with that central repository. So we could get Thorn on board using that central repository and then run the software on it to create the links using the Shamir secret sharing multi-party computation. And, then big tech companies could see where the links were, and then, if they need to investigate it out further, and then using the video image recognition to find the missing people. So overall, there are many technologies and that exist, but this was some of the ideas that I've come up with based on the research and where I think it would impact the greatest amount in the fastest way. But that's about it. I'm open to all feedback and excited to hear what you have to say about it. Thank you.